Hello and welcome. I am Light and this is my channel. Today I'm going to tell you about a murder case that is so gruesome, so disturbing, that I'm warning you in advance. If you have a weak stomach, if you are in a position where you don't think that you can hear something like that, then now is the time to go ahead and click that X in your corner. This case has left everybody involved haunted. It has left the police who were involved, the police who investigated, the police who found the victims disturbed. It left an entire town on edge and frightened. It had locals carrying weapons, openly carrying shotguns and rifles when they were doing their daily errands, going to the grocery store, going to the bank, going to fill their car up with gas. It left a mother not knowing who killed her son and his family in a brutal, brutal way. Before we get started on this, please give this video a thumbs up. Doing so brings attention to my channel, and I'd really appreciate that. Also, if you are not subscribed, please do so. And go ahead and leave your comments. Go ahead and leave your theories. Go ahead and leave your thoughts, your feelings. Tell me what you think about this case, and we'll discuss. All right, let's get started. Keith Dardeen was 29 years old, and his wife, Elaine, was 30. Both of the Dardeens went by their middle names. Keith was a native of Mount Carmel, and he had bought the trailer home they lived in 1986 after he completed the training required for his job as a treatment plant operator at the Rend Lake Water Conservancy District's nearby facility. Elaine, who was from Albion, a little closer to Ena, moved there later with their 2-year-old son, Peter. They rented the land it sat on from a nearby farming couple. Keith worked. His wife found a job at an office supply store in Mount Vernon. When not working, the couple were part of their musical ensemble at a small Baptist church in the village. Keith sang lead vocals, and Elaine played the piano. They were, by all accounts, a happy family. In 1987, Elaine became pregnant with the couple's second child. They had decided to name the baby either Ian or Casey, depending on whether it was a boy or a girl. The pending addition to the family had led Keith and Elaine to strongly consider moving. By late in the year, they had went and put their mobile home up for sale. However, that was not the only reason for their move. According to Joanne Dardeen, Keith's mother, he said he would move back to Mount Carmel even if he was unable to find a job before he moved, as he regretted ever having moved to Ina. He was telling his mother that the area had become too violent. There had been 15 homicides in Jefferson County during the previous 2 years. The first one was committed by Thomas Odell. He was a Mount Vernon teenager, and he had killed his parents and his 3 siblings as they individually returned home in 1985. Though Odell, as well as some of the others who were involved in murders, had been charged with those cases, there had been many who had not been. Several unsolved murders, and the residents of the rural area were becoming fearful and stressed. There had been a 10-year-old girl who had been attacked, sexually assaulted, and murdered in May of 1987, and Keith had had enough. He became so protective of the family that one night a young woman came by the mobile home and asked if she could make a phone call, and Keith refused to let her in. The town was on edge, and so was Keith Dardeen. On November 18th, Keith, who had been a reliable worker at the treatment plant, did not report for his shift. He had not called in to inform his supervisor that he would be unable to come in, and calls to his house went unanswered all day. So finally, his supervisor called both of Keith's parents. They were divorced, but they lived near each other in Mount Carmel. Neither of them had heard from their son or had any idea that anything was wrong. Keith's father, Don Dardeen, called the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office and agreed to drive down to Ina with the house key and meet deputies at the home of his son and daughter-in-law. Inside, they found a scene that they'd never forget, a scene that would haunt them, a scene that would cause neighbors to see their doctors to tell them how psychologically damaged they'd been feeling, how scared. What they found in the home was so violent, so gruesome. Elaine Dardeen and her 3-year-old son, Peter, had been beaten to death with a baseball bat that had been a birthday present to Peter from his father earlier that year, so violently that if they weren't in their own home, they wouldn't be recognizable. That's not it. Elaine was pregnant. She was nearly 8 months pregnant, and the beating so brutalized her that it caused her to give birth to the child, and the murderer showed no mercy for the newborn Casey, a little girl. He beat her with the baseball bat. Then he took Elaine, who had been tied up and gagged with duct tape. He placed her in a bed with her 3-year-old son, Peter, and her newborn daughter, and tucked the family in. Then he or they went about cleaning up the mess. When the police walked in, it could have been a scene where they were seeing a young mother sleeping in bed with her newborn and her 3-year-old. Unfortunately, that was not the case. The person who was missing was Keith Dardeen. And of course, upon seeing the level of violence, of hate that had to have driven this murder, they assumed that it could only be someone close to the family, close to Elaine. And Keith was missing. So obviously, he became the suspect. Who else could become so enraged, so full of hate, that he could beat a 3-year-old child, a pregnant woman, and then a newborn baby? However, the next day, Keith's body was found in a field. He had been shot 3 times, and his genitals had been cut and removed from his body. Who could have done this brutal thing? Who could have exhibited that kind of evil, that kind of hate and violence, gone through with such a gruesome murder? Keith's car was found outside the police station of Benton, which is about 11 miles from the Dardeen home. Blood on the interior indicated that it was likely the site of Keith Dardeen's murder. News of those killings made area residents even more fearful than they had already been. As I said, they began going about their daily business with shotguns visible. After high school basketball games, the students would wait in the school building for their parents to come in and accompany them to the parking lot for their ride home. Early reports from the police about the crime were limited and sometimes contradictory, allowing rumors to spread. With the combination of the way Elaine and the children were killed and the fact that Keith's genitals had been brutally cut from his body and removed, it supported speculation that Satanists were active in the area and had performed a ritual sacrifice on this family. Also, there were rumors of a regional serial killer, considering there were also local unsolved murders. Dr. Richard Garrettson, a family physician who doubled as the Jefferson County coroner, told the St. Louis Post-Dispatch in early December that many of his patients had talked to him about the case and how it was disturbing them. One man, who said he lived a half a mile from the Dardeens' trailer, told Garrettson that he was having difficulty sleeping and had lost 14 pounds as a result of the stress. Also unable to sleep was the Dardeens' landlord's daughter, who had told her parents years later that she had kept her bedroom light on and read all night out of fear. Robert Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, was quoted as saying that people were so afraid that if someone ran out of gas in the country, that they would not seek assistance of any kind in nearby homes, but would instead walk to the nearest highway and would rather hitch a ride. Local police agencies joined forces with the Illinois State Police to investigate this crime. There were a total of 30 detectives working full-time, following leads and interviewing over 100 people. None of that was found to be fruitful. There was a man taken into custody early on, and he was released. Likewise, a co-worker of Keith's, whom he reportedly had been having a dispute with, was also cleared. No one who knew the couple had anything bad to say about them. There had been a small quantity of marijuana found in the trailer, but not enough to suggest that they were involved in any dealing. Police eventually believed that the marijuana was probably left by the killer or killers. The autopsy found no drugs or alcohol in any of the victims. The coroners put the time of death for all the Dardeens within 1 hour of each other. The bodies in the trailer had been killed probably 12 hours before they were found, and Keith Dardeen had been killed about 24 to 36 hours when he was found. Resolving this question, however, made it harder to determine how the crime had been committed, since Keith's body was found away from the trailer and he may have been killed at the location rather than with his family. At the trailer, the killer or killers had apparently taken the time to not only tuck Elaine's body into bed, along with their children's bodies, but also to clean up the scene, suggesting that they did not feel an urge to leave. It was then thought that Keith might have been taken first and killed, and then the killer or killers came back to kill the family. Determining the motives of the assailant was a particularly difficult part of this case. The back door had been left open, so that was the point of entry, because there was no forced entry. A VCR and a portable camera were in plain sight in the living room. They had not been taken. Elsewhere in the house was equally accessible cash and jewelry. Those also remained. These facts argued against robbery as a motive. Also, Elaine had not been the victim of a sexual assault. Police found no evidence of any extramarital affairs involving either Keith or Elaine that might have motivated the other party to be in a jealous rage. A stack of papers with scorecards was found in the house, and that led them to believe that maybe Keith had incurred gambling debts, but Keith's mother said that his son was so frugal that he raised money for his son's college fund by reselling 50-cent cans of soda at work for a small profit. Lewis, the Franklin County coroner, said that he did not believe that the Dardeens were randomly chosen. I believe it was a very personal, deliberate thing, which killing someone with a baseball bat, looking them in the face, killing someone and before you do, you remove their genitals. It's very personal, or even afterwards is very personal. This seems to me to be someone with rage, jealousy, and an emotion like that is often involved with love. But you guys tell me what you think. A police expert on cults told the newspaper that the rumor that Satanists were responsible was simply untrue. Such groups would often mutilate bodies more extensively and then take their organs, leave symbols, and lit candles in the area. None of these were left at the scene of the Dardeens' trailer. Police, however, did allow for the possibility that the Dardeens had been chosen purposely. It may have been a case of mistaken identity by the killer or killers. Joanne Dardeen said later that she had considered other motives someone might have had for killing her son. She said, "I think someone wanted Keith to sell drugs and he refused, or there's a possibility that someone liked Elaine and she wouldn't accept his advances, and he took his rage out on both of them. We just don't know." Eventually, the police exhausted all other leads and had to start working other cases. 2 FBI profilers came to the area to review the evidence, but they were unable to make suggestions because they found that generally the crime defied their typical analytical methods. Joanne Dardeen worked to keep the public from completely losing interest. Throughout the 1990s, she regularly called one of the detectives still assigned to the case, offering possible leads she had learned or asking for any new information that she could share. She gathered 3,000 signatures from the area to petition the Oprah Winfrey Show, asking producers to do a segment on the killings of her son and family. But the Oprah Winfrey Show turned her down, saying that the crime was too brutal for daytime television, and even America's Most Wanted had had a similar reaction. But eventually, they changed its mind and ran a segment in 1998. The show did not generate any new leads. The police were briefly interested in a serial killer named Angel Maturino Resendez, who was then known by his alias Rafael Resendez Ramirez, after he surrendered to authorities in 1999. He often traveled around the country by hopping freight trains, choosing his victims near the tracks they traveled and often beating them to death. While those elements suggested the Dardeen killings, authorities in Illinois were never able to connect him to the crime. Then, another serial killer in Texas would soon bring himself to the attention of the investigators in Illinois. On the last day of 1999, Tommy Lynn Sells cut the throat of 2 girls in Del Rio, Texas. One survived and helped the police identify him. He was eventually convicted and sentenced to death for that murder, and another one earlier in 1999 where he had killed a girl in San Antonio. While he was awaiting trial on the first murder charge, he began confessing to other murders he had committed while drifting around the country, sometimes by hopping freights as well. One of the murders he confessed to was of the Dardeen family. Sells said he did not remember the details of all the crimes he admitted to, which he describes as a coping strategy from the sexual abuse he endured as a child in the Missouri boot heel. But he did remember that one, in particular, in the mid-1980s, he said that Sells was living primarily near St. Louis, roughly 90 miles northwest of Jefferson County, and making money by working at traveling carnivals and fairs as a day laborer, or through theft. For the latter pursuit, he often hitched rides with truckers or hopped freights without any particular destination in mind. He's quoted as saying, "Anywhere a ride was going, I was headed that way too. Might be Illinois one day and Oklahoma tomorrow." It was through truckers and trains that he became familiar with the area. On one trip through Jefferson County in November of 1987, he claimed in 2010 to have met Keith at a truck stop near Mount Vernon. But when he told the story again, he said he met Keith at a local pool hall, which is not something Keith would have been engaged in. In both versions, he says that Keith invited him home for dinner. After the meal, he said that he was planning on moving on, but then Keith allegedly triggered his anger by sexually propositioning him And in one of his other accounts, he said that he asked him to have a threesome with Elaine. Sells went on to say that he forced Keith at gunpoint to drive to where his body was found, killed and mutilated him out of rage and anger, then returned to the trailer to kill Elaine and Peter, who were witnesses, although he said at the time that was a result of uncontrollable rage that Keith's alleged sexual offer had set him off. I was just so pissed off that I took it to the maximum limit. Rage don't have a stop button, he's quoted as saying. He implied that it explained why he had killed the infant Elaine had delivered during the beating as well. In a third version, Sells completely left out the encounter with Keith and the sexual proposition. Said it didn't happen. According to that account, he got off the freight, he had hopped near Ina, and when he saw the Dardeen trailer with its for sale sign, he saw an opportunity for a killing, which makes no sense to me. If it's for sale, you would think that they'd have people coming regularly to see it. After drinking beers and waiting for the right time, he knocked on the door in the evening, when it was dark, and told a wary Keith that he was interested in buying the trailer. He then overpowered Keith, made him bind and gag his wife and son with duct tape, and forced him to drive his car to the nearby field at gunpoint. That's where he sliced off Keith's genitals, telling him he was going to take them back to Elaine to show her. But after he shot him, he left them there. At the trailer, he said he raped Elaine, which was not true. He had not. Then he beat Peter, Elaine, and the newborn to death. Then he cleaned up the home, and he drove Keith's car to Benton. Sells was never charged with their murders, and some Texas police felt that his execution was for the Dardeens as well, but a lot of police officers thought that he was lying. In fact, even though he seemed to know some details of the case that no one else knew, he's also on record as asking about those details, trying to have the police give him details that only the killer would know. All the police involved agree that Sells may have added details to a story because he was known to do that. They were left in considerable doubt about many of the other cases he had confessed to as well. While Sells' account is consistent with the general facts of the case, most of what he told them had been reported publicly. Sells had confessed to 70 murders, but police believe that he was only responsible for 22 only. They believe that what he was trying to do was confess to as many murders as possible to save himself from the death penalty. What he thought he would do was tell them that he committed 70 murders, and then they would have to keep him alive to chase down these leads. He told them where he could lead them to the bodies of his victims. However, Texas law does not allow a prisoner on death row to be taken out of state, and authorities were unwilling to find a way to make an exception for him. So, he was never charged. Keith's friends and family also had doubts that Sells did it. For one thing, they don't think that Keith ever would have invited someone from out of town home to his family. As was said earlier, he was very fearful, so fearful he wanted to leave the area. He wouldn't have brought a stranger home to meet his family and have dinner with them. If he wouldn't even let a young girl use the phone, he wasn't going to let a man in. Joanne Dardeen's position on Sells' guilt has evolved. In 2000, she was convinced that he was the killer, but as time went on, she didn't believe that he was. She said that she was 99% sure that he did not kill her son and his family. In 2010, Sells was given an interview, and he said then that he would invite Joanne to come talk to him. If she wants to come here and talk to me, scream at me, yell at me, kick me, hit me, she should have the right to do that, he said. But he said that no apology could make her have closure. He said, sorry ain't gonna cut it. So what is there to say? I could tell her sorry every day for the rest of my life. It's not gonna stop her pain. And one thing I do know is about pain, and it don't go away. By the time he was executed in 2014, Keith's mother was absolutely certain that he didn't have anything to do with the murder. She did, however, wish that he hadn't been executed so she could have more time to talk to him and ask him questions. She said that a lot of people think it's done and over with, but to me, it's not. And it may never be. We may never know what happened to the Dardeen family, but we do know that it's tragic, gruesome, violent. I've done hundreds of videos about murders, 1,000 maybe, and unsolved murders and unidentified victims and serial killers, and I think that this might be the worst story I've ever encountered. The cruelty, the level of hate, to me feels personal. I don't think it's random. But who would hate this family that much? Well, if we knew that, we might have ourselves a killer. What do you think? Does this feel like a random, brutal murder? Someone who hopped off a train, saw a for sale sign, and decided, it's my lucky day? Or does it feel different somehow? More personal? Please leave your comments below. Thank you for coming. I appreciate it. And good night.